Thank you for your patience while I'm just plugging everything in. So just a quick introduction. My name is Yujin Hong. I'm a program manager on the Azure Government engineering team. So I work for Microsoft. And just a quick poll, how many people in here are actually familiar with Azure or Azure Government? Oh, okay, so a lot of people. That's great. All right, so hopefully I can skip kind of the intros on like what Azure Gov is and what Azure is in general. But it is our Microsoft's platform, so AWS competitor. And I'm just gonna, so I have a few quick slides that I'm gonna kind of blow through. All right, that is a screen. No, they're my favorite K-pop group. Anyways, all right. So check them out when you have the chance. So yeah, I'm just gonna blow through these slides really quick because again, the meat of this is the technical demo, and I want to show you guys kind of our platform and what you can do on here. So in general, I don't know how many of you are familiar with serverless offerings, but I'll kind of go through why we want serverless and why it's important. So in the beginning, we had on-prem, or a lot of the government's still on-prem, right? So you have all these questions as a developer that you have to deal with. You have to actually think about the physical hardware in your physical data centers, who's managing that, who actually has access to these servers. And then you have all these other things where about patching the server, the OS that's on it, etc. All right. So now we moved on to IaaS. So now you've actually lifted and shifted. You've moved some of your workloads to the cloud, right? Whether it be, God forbid, AWS or Azure or both. Now you're kind of utilizing the cloud, right? So you have a lot less questions you're dealing with, right? So now you don't actually need to think about the physical hardware. You can just have it managed by someone else, like Microsoft. All right. And now we're getting a little more advanced. Now we are in PaaS, or Platform as a Service. So not only do we actually have our workloads in Azure and just running in a VM, but we're actually utilizing some services that we have, such as web applications on Azure. So now I'm actually removing the infrastructure. I don't care about patching the OS or managing how many instances of my VM. I'm just caring about my application, right? How can I scale my app? How many servers do I need? So you still need to deal with these questions. And that leads us to serverless. So now, if serverless, there's still a physical server. It's not magic, but we're managing all of that. So we have another level of abstraction where Microsoft is managing all of that for you. So now you don't even need to care about scaling. You don't need to care about patching your servers or security or your physical hardware. All you're actually focusing on is a code, which as a developer, that's all you want to do. You don't want to have to deal with all these extra things. And that is kind of why we are really pushing for serverless to a lot of our customers. So we do actually have several serverless offerings on the Azure platform. So one of them is Azure Functions. How many of you have used Azure Functions or heard of it? Oh, that's great. So you guys already know how cool it is. It's basically just allowing you to write snippets of code, right? And you're just running it, where you don't have to care about the infrastructure. You don't have to care about how it's being run. You just write the code and that's it. And it does exactly what you're doing, which is the name function, right? We have another offering called Event Grid. And then we have Logic Apps. So I'm only going to go into depth of Logic Apps because this is the offering that I want to show in this demo today, but feel free to look at the other offerings in your own time. So Logic Apps is a service that provides a real visual design experience, and you'll see that when we actually go through to the demo. But the real power in Logic Apps comes from creating workflows. So let's say you have business logic, right? But you don't actually want to write code. Let's say first of all, maybe you're not a developer, or maybe you are a developer, but you're like, I don't really want to write code right now. Logic Apps allows you to do that. It's actually a drag and drop experience. So it's really a visual experience where we provide you this UI that's really easy to use. You don't have to write any code, but still accomplish and build applications that do what you want it to do. And the really cool part actually of Logic Apps is all these connectors that Microsoft already has provided for you. So we have over 200 connectors, and that number is increasing every month, I think. And we see all these names on here. So we see all these first-party services, right? So we can plug into Azure Functions, Azure Cosmos DB, which is our database offering, SQL, etc. However, we can also see some of these third-party things, right? Like Slack, we have Twitter, we have Dropbox, Salesforce. You can actually connect to all these other third-party services with these connectors that we provide you. And you don't actually have to think about the integration details on how to communicate with these other services and these other SDKs and use their APIs, etc. You don't need to think about any of that because we've given you all of that to work with. So now we're actually going to go on to the demo and see that for ourselves. All right, so this is the Azure Government portal. So again, I'm doing everything on Azure Government. And this is a Logic app that I've already deployed. For those of you who haven't deployed anything in Azure or Azure Gov, it's really easy. It's like you just click create and you type in the resource that you want and you fill in like 2 or 3 things. Like for this, I think I just had to fill in the name of the Logic app and the region. So it's really easy to actually deploy this. So now I have this application deployed. But it's empty. It's an empty application because we see I have this kind of Logic App Designer page that shows up. So it's like, all right, now you've provisioned your app, you can actually start building something. So in here we have these triggers. So we see things like when an HTTP request is received, or when a new email is received in Outlook.com, when a new tweet is posted. So the way that the Logic app is run is you actually have some sort of trigger. So so some of those examples that we just saw, whenever those things happen, we actually want this workflow to start. We want this application to start running. And we also see we have some of these templates already provided for us. So we can see things like sending an email when an item in a SharePoint list is modified. I'm sure we have scenarios in our lives today where we want something like that, right? You want some sort of alerting, or something really simple like an HTTP request response, such as like a webhook scenario, right? So we already have all these templates for you that you can kind of take a look at if you're first starting out with Logic apps. But we're actually going to start with a blank Logic app. All right, so we're going to actually go through and build one together right now. So hopefully the Wi-Fi holds up. So first thing, I need some sort of trigger to actually start my workflow. So let's keep it really simple. Let's just choose this schedule trigger. So I'm just going to click this recurrence. So for those of you who see, hopefully you guys can see. I'm trying to, okay, maximize it a little bit. So this is just going to run every 3 minutes. That's all that I've specified for the recurrence. So this app is going to run every 3 minutes. And I'm going to choose my next step. So now, let's say I want to do something like monitor an RSS feed. So really convenient is we actually have this RSS connector right here. But there are a bunch of others where you can just search for it, and you can see that all of these different triggers populate. So again, I said we have over 200 plus connectors. So I'm going to choose this RSS feed. And I'm going to choose list all RSS feed items. All right, I'm going to click on that. And now we can see I have this little connector box, and I have to fill in some information. I have to give it an RSS feed URL. So I actually have that right here. I'm just going to copy this URL. So this is actually a South Korean RSS news feed, and I'll explain why we have it. Why we're using this specific feed. But I've given it this URL. Great. So now I can just move on to the next step of my workflow. All right. So we're retrieving these items. We're getting this feed of articles, right? But it's actually giving me a whole list of articles. So if you think about as a developer, right, if you're dealing with a list of things, what do? You need a for each loop, right, to go through each item in that list. So it's actually, we have a for each connector right here. So again, it's like writing code without having to write the code, right? So all of these kind of things, that fundamental things that you would do when writing code, we have connectors for. So not only are these connectors allowing you to integrate with third-party services or first-party services, it also gives you options like writing a for each loop or an if statement, etc. All right, so now I'm going to click in here. All right. So it's like, what am I actually going to for each over? What am I going to loop over? And we actually notice on this left-hand side, we actually have this dynamic content that's populated, right? So this dynamic content is actually the outputs from our previous step. So again, this is a workflow, right? So you have a step and then you have an output from that step. And then now you want to create another step. So you want to be able to use the outputs from your previous step as the inputs for your next steps, which is basically what this is. So I'm going to choose body. So it's going to give me all of the articles. All right. And then I'm actually going to click add an action within this connector. So now you can kind of see it's kind of obvious, right? We're actually in some sort of for loop, a loop. And now all of the actions that I'm going to create from now on are going to be within this loop. So I'm going to actually rename this and write for each article so we know what we're doing here. Right? So we're looping over the articles. We've retrieved this articles from the RSS feed. Great. What do I want to do next? So let's say I want to actually use this text translator connector. So this is actually part of my Azure's cognitive services, which is one of our AI offerings. So it's a bunch of APIs where you basically just give it some sort of input. In here, we're trying to translate some sort of text, and then this API will we give it an input and we give it a language that we want it to translate to. And this API will be able to do that for you. And it's already built in because that's one of our services that we have in Azure. So I'm actually going to choose a text to translate here. So again, we have all this dynamic content because now we're actually looking at a single article, right? So we have things like feed title, so article title, article summary. So let's say I want to translate the article title. And I'm going to rename this to translate title. And the target language will be English. Because again, like I said, this is a South Korean news feed, so I can understand it, but most of you guys probably can't, right? So we want to be able to translate it. All right. So I'm actually going to do the same thing. I'm just going to translate the summary this time. So I'm going to relate that. All right. And we're going to choose summary, feed summary. Great. And English. Okay, cool. So now we've gone through, we've translated the title, we've translated the summary of the article. What's the next step? I want to actually write this to some sort of database, right? So I'm doing all this translation. I want to write it to a database, but in order to do that, I need to actually have some sort of data structure defined, right? So in order to do that, we can use this method called compose, which is basically like defining a class, right? For developers, you have to define classes all the time. This is allowing you to do that without, again, writing any code. And here I actually give it a JSON structure. So I already have this snippet right here. And I'm going to paste it in there. So this is a structure in the fields, that I want in my, written to my database. So we have an ID property, okay? So for this, I'm actually going to choose a feed link because each article has a unique link. So that will be the ID of this document that's going to be written to a database. And then I have a summary. For the summary, again, look, we have the translated summary, right, as an output now. So that was the output from that translation step. So I'm going to choose that. All right. Title, again, I have that translated title. If I can scroll, great. All right, and then update it on. I just want the date, so I'm just going to get this. All right, so now we can see exactly what the fields we have and exactly what data is going to be populating those fields, right? So we've gone ahead and done that, and now the next step is to actually write this to a database. So we have a Cosmos database connector here. How many of you are familiar with Cosmos? Great. So for those of you who aren't, Cosmos is one of our database data services. It's actually kind of a document database. So we have like a SQL API, MongoDB API, Graph API. So all of these different, you can choose what kind of API you want for your database, and you can, so right now this is actually kind of like a SQL database. So we'll just treat it as a SQL database, but we're writing documents to it. All right. So I'm going to choose a database. I'm going to choose a collection, which is like the table. And I'm going to write in here, I'm going to choose that output from the compose operation that we had just before. All right. And one last thing is we actually need to add a partition key value, which is actually required now for Cosmos. It just allows Cosmos to basically be more efficient when querying and querying your documents. So I'm going to just choose here the feed link, because that is that unique ID we have for each of the documents. Great. All right. So we've gone through, we've written the database, we're almost done. Let's say I want to actually have some sort of if statement. I want to have an if-else statement here. So this is actually basically the equivalent of an if-else statement. So the condition I'm going to be looking at is, let's say I want to see if the summary contains Amazon, right? I want to know about it, right? I want to know about it. I want to receive some sort of alert, notification. So if true, I'm going to add an action. If that's true, I'm going to actually send an email. So we have this convenient Office 365 Outlook connector here. Great. And I'm just going to connect. I'm just going to choose the send an email action. And I'm going to send it to this email right here, right? And I'm going to say logic app alert. And for the body of the email, I'm just going to give it the summary that we have translated. Great. All right. So now I'm going to actually save this. And I'm actually going to click run. All right. So that was a lot, I know, in a very short period of time. So let's see. Oh, I'm actually going to have to enable it. All right. So I'm going to run that trigger. And if we actually notice here, we have all of these runs, these run histories, right? So what this actually is pretty much like an audit, like a log of every time your app has run and what has happened every single time it's run, right? So we actually click on one of the runs. We can actually see, let me just click on the one that just happened. So 6:58 p.m. today. This was the run that just happened. Our logic app just ran because we clicked on it. And we see all these green marks, which means there were no errors. Great. So we can see we have this RSS feed, and we see in this box down in the bottom, some sort of, it's Korean, right? So great, that step worked. Great. And now let's actually see if that translation step worked. So we see we have this Korean here, and then right in the bottom, you see that English translation right there, right? So that step has worked successfully. So let's, for the database, let's actually see for ourselves, has this actually written to a database? So this is the database that I actually had that app connected to. And you can see it was empty before because the documents show up here, but let me just click refresh. Great. So we see now we have all these documents that are populating this database, right? Oh, sorry. Okay. So we can see all these documents that are populating our database, and I know it's kind of hard to see, but you can see that is the data structure that we defined. So we've successfully written to our database, and our logic app just did that. And then we had that last condition, right? That alerting. So let's see if there was any articles that had Amazon in it. So it went to my junk email actually for some reason, but we can see we have this email that was actually sent from the logic app, right? And we do see the word Amazon in this article summary. So that if statement was triggered correctly, and it sent me an alert, and I was able to see what happened, right? So I know that was a lot in a short period of time, but let's just think about what just happened, right? what we were able to do in like 15 minutes. So we were able to monitor some sort of news feed, or it could be Twitter, right? It could be social media. We're monitoring that. We've set up some sort of database where we're writing to a database. We're doing things like text translation. We can also do things like sentiment analysis and be able to tell if something's positive or negative with the power of Azure Cognitive Services. Then we're also able to set up alerting, right? We're able to set up this if statements, and we're able to set up alerts, whether it be through Teams or email, etc. And this all comes with logging, audit logging, which we were able to step through each step every time our app has run and see what happened. And we're able to do that in 15 minutes, right? Think about how much time you would actually have to spend as a developer figuring out how to integrate with all those different services and writing all that code when you just did that and you didn't have to write any code. So that was just the power of Logic Apps, and I hope you guys saw something interesting here today. Thank you. Yes. So this was again a serverless offering. So you only pay forever however long it's running. So you can turn it off, disable it, enable it, whatnot, and only pay for that amount of time. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions for Yujin before she leaves? Sure.
Is there a mechanism for getting third-party applications into the marketplace or whatever you're calling it?
Yeah. So from what I know, that's actually internal. I think like customers can request like I want this kind of connector or whatnot, but that's all up to the Logic App team to actually, publish those for the customers. Yeah.
Anything else? Okay.